Split ticket voting is not uncommon in Ohio. It looks by the polling that he is on his way to another victory. Brown is above 50%. And so it looks like his strategy of all politics is local, sort of staying above the partisan fray, may be working.
Jon Tester, who is fighting for his political life. Tester is up against Tim Sheehy, a Trump-backed wealthy Republican businessman.
A lot of Democrats think this could be their Achilles heel. Even though Tester is strong locally, this shows you how voter behavior is changing nationally, where people are not backing that down, far down from the top of the ticket.
The Senate race in Texas, where Democratic House Representative Colin Allred is trying to unseat Republican Senator Ted Cruz.
There's a bit of a wild card this election. 2.6 million new voters added since Cruz was last up for re-election in 2018, and that's when he won by less than 3 percentage points against Beto O'Rourke. It is still an uphill battle for Allred. I mean, he's trying to do what no Democrat has done in the state in 30 years, win a statewide election.
We're back with The Big Deal. I'm Errol Louis, and tonight we are turning our focus to a handful of races that could determine which party controls the U.S. Senate when a new Congress convenes next year. Democrats are currently at risk of losing their slim majority of 51 out of 100 as they defend 23 seats across the country, including in the presidential battleground states of Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Meanwhile, with only 11 Republican-held seats up for re-election, Republicans are optimistic about their chance of winning back control of the Senate. That's because the party is all but guaranteed to pick up at least one seat in West Virginia following the retirement of independent Senator Joe Manchin, who voted with the Democratic majority. That means if Republicans are successful in flipping just one state, the Senate would be tied at 50-50, with the new vice president providing the tie-breaking vote. But if Republicans flip 2 or more seats, that party will take control of the chamber, regardless of who wins the White House. Joining me now to break down some of the high-stakes races on the ballot are 2 analysts who have been tracking these contests very closely. Curtis Jackson is a political anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Columbus, Ohio, and Bob Hart is Spectrum News political director, joining me here in studio. And Curtis, let's start with that Senate race in your home state of Ohio. It's the most expensive contest in the country, where the Democrat, Sherrod Brown, is seeking a 4th term and facing off against a Trump-backed candidate named Bernie Moreno. The polling there finds that while Trump is comfortably ahead of Harris in Ohio, Sherrod Brown, the Democrat, is ahead of Bernie Moreno by 2 percentage points. He, of course, was visibly absent from the DNC. Sherrod Brown didn't show up, and he's been distancing himself from Biden and Harris. What's going on there, and is his strategy working?
Well, to quote one of my favorite songs by The Police, please don't stand so close to me, right? Look, I don't think that Brown, or for all that matter, the Harris campaign, believes there's any upside at all to the 2 of them appearing on the stump together. Of course, Donald Trump won the state in 2020 by 8 points. He won it in 2016 by 8 points. There's little doubt that he's probably going to cruise to another victory in November. And so there's not a lot of upside for the 2 of them appearing together. That all said, Brown himself remains very popular. Split ticket voting is not uncommon in Ohio. You're looking at a situation where Brown, again, won in 2016 when Trump carried the state. It looks by the polling that he is on his way to another victory. Narrow polling, or narrow as it may be at this point, Brown is above 50%. And so it looks like his strategy of all politics is local, sort of staying above the partisan fray, may be working.
Okay. Now, Bob, let's talk about another expensive race in the battleground Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You got Democratic Senator Bob Casey, who is seeking a 4th term as well. He's facing a Republican challenger named Dave McCormick, a former hedge fund CEO. Almost $200 million has been spent on this race so far. Is McCormick a serious threat to Democrats there, as far as you can tell?
So polls show this race to be close, but there hasn't been a single public poll out there that has shown McCormick ahead of Bob Casey Jr. Unlike Ohio, Pennsylvania seems to be a jump ball in the presidential race. So much time and money is being spent on the presidential race that we forget that there's a U.S. Senate race going on that is quite close. Like Sherrod Brown, Bob Casey Jr. was elected in 2006. Sometimes there's sort of an expiration date on senators. It doesn't feel that way with Casey right now, but it is extremely expensive and it is extremely close.
Okay, let's keep going, Curtis. We'll move out to Arizona now, where there's an open seat up for grabs. The Republican candidate out there is Kari Lake, who is a close ally of Trump. She's going head-to-head against a Democratic member of Congress, Ruben Gallego, a Marine Corps veteran. Now, Trump won this state back in 2016, but then Biden won it in 2020. It's a real swing state. If we look at the latest polling, Trump appears to be leading by 5 points, but then Kari Lake is trailing Ruben Gallego. In this race specifically, it seems like undecided Republican voters are going to, I guess, play a big role, right?
Certainly. And I want to put a name on those voters here because I think that's important, especially when you're talking about Lake. These are John McCain voters, right? These are Nikki Haley voters. These are voters that she has somewhat offended during her failed gubernatorial run, that, going out against and being very critical, if not disrespectful, of John McCain and his service to the country and to the state of Arizona. I think that is probably going to result in a great deal of backlash. For some voters, it's a bridge too far for them to cross. They have very, fond memories of McCain and his service to the state of Arizona. And then you compare her to the candidate that she's facing, Gallego, and you have here a military veteran. You have someone who's been in Congress 5 terms, so he's familiar. And then you have a situation where he also taking sort of a step that Brown has taken, is not really adhering or being too closely aligned with the party with respect to any sort of optics here.
Right.
Party line, but certainly it's a situation where those voters, those Nikki Haley voters and those John McCain voters, they're the ones who could be decisive in this race.
Okay, now Bob, we have to talk about this high-stakes Montana race. They've got a Democratic incumbent out there, John Tester, who is fighting for his political life. Tester is up against Tim Sheehy, a Trump-backed wealthy Republican businessman. Tester is really the last remaining Democrat to hold high office in that state. He's clearly in trouble. The latest polls show him 8 points behind Sheehy. So could this be the race that makes the difference and gives the Republicans control of the Senate?
A lot of Democrats think this could be their Achilles heel. And unlike Arizona, which is a swing state, Montana has been firmly Republican since Bill Clinton was first elected in 1992. You saw the poll, 17-point lead for Donald Trump there. And Tester, who's a very popular, but he bites into that lead. He has an 8-point deficit with Tim Sheehy. So that's the real problem, is that Sheehy, who's only lived in Montana for the last 10 years, is running as a national candidate. And even though Tester is strong locally, this shows you how voter behavior is changing nationally, where people are not backing that down far down from the top of the ticket now.
Okay, thanks very much, Bob. Thank you, Curtis. We are not done with this analysis. Coming up next, we're going to delve into 4 other Senate races. Stay with us. We are back with The Big Deal, analyzing some of the high-stakes Senate races that are on the ballot next month. Bob Hart is with me here in our studio, and joining us from Austin, Texas is Spectrum News political anchor Karina Kling. Karina, let's start with the Senate race in Texas, where Democratic House Representative Colin Allred is trying to unseat Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Now, the Cook Political Report, which is one of the respected analytical firms, recently downgraded Cruz's chances, changing the race's rating from likely Republican to lean Republican. And I understand the two faced off in a debate this week. How are Democrats doing in this traditionally deep red state?
Yeah, both really came out swinging in that debate. I do want to note, Errol, the demographics are changing in Texas, and it must be noted that there's a bit of a wild card this election. 2.6 million new voters added since Cruz was last up for re-election in 2018, and that's when he won by less than 3 percentage points against Beto O'Rourke. It is still an uphill battle for Allred. He's trying to do what no Democrat has done in the state in 30 years, win a statewide election. Polls do show a close race with Cruz about 4 points ahead overall with the average of polls, but Allred has actually outraised Cruz. National Democrats are pouring money into this campaign, and Cruz has warned Republicans not to be complacent. I think one thing that's really telling about Cruz in this race is that he is and that he is a little nervous. He's been trying to remake his image as a bipartisan, someone who's worked across the aisle during his tenure. But he's gotten some criticism for that because he rose to fame as a conservative firebrand. Allred knows he has to win over independents and crossover voters in order to win in Texas. And so he's really leaned heavily into his bipartisan work and really distanced himself a little bit from Kamala Harris, too.
Okay. Now, Bob, besides Texas, Democrats are also pouring money into trying to defeat another Republican incumbent, and that's in Florida, where Senator Rick Scott, the state's former governor, actually, is facing a challenge from Democrat Debbie Murcazel-Powell, a former congresswoman who is well known in Florida. It's a long shot effort, or at least it's seen that way, but I understand they think their candidate is going to get a boost from voters who are turning out for a statewide ballot referendum on abortion rights.
Yeah, and you know, Montana is also doing that too. There's a referendum in Montana where the Democrats are hoping that'll boost turnout. This is the hope for Democrats, along with Texas. If they lose Montana, maybe they can win in either Texas or Florida. And the good news for Murcazel-Powell is there's a Marist College poll out that shows the race, her just trailing by 2 percentage points. We see in state after state the Democratic candidate doing better than the top of the ticket in the polls. And that's the case in Texas, and that's the case here in Florida as well.
Okay, that could be really an upset. They have so many electoral votes there. And Karina, up in Michigan, there's a wide open Senate race where former Republican Congressman Mike Rogers is up against Democratic Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin. Those two candidates are neck and neck in the most recent polls, but Kamala Harris's advantage in the state has disappeared. So is this Senate race going to be tied to the Trump-Harris fight in Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, it looks that way. The Senate race is one of several, as you guys have noted, that could help determine control of the chamber and decide the presidential contest this fall. Unlike in some other swing states, both candidates are sticking close to the tops of their tickets. I mentioned in Texas, Allred has kind of been distancing himself from Kamala Harris, but national Republicans dumping more money into this race in hopes of flipping it, which would mean Democrats face a much steeper path to victory. Slotkin has warned about Harris being underwater in Michigan. Now, maybe that's a fundraising tactic, painting themselves as the underdog in polling, trying to get more money, but both candidates know their fate is likely tied to how the top of the ticket performs in Michigan.
Okay, and now, Bob, last but not least, let's talk about Wisconsin. The Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin is defending her seat against Republican Eric Hovde. Recent polling shows Baldwin poised to hold on to the seat. She's got a decent lead there, even as Vice President Kamala Harris is trailing former President Trump these days. It seems like ticket splitting or cross-voting is happening in Wisconsin, even though that's relatively rare in most states.
Yeah, it exists, and we're seeing it. That's the theme, I would say, in all of these races, is we're seeing it. The Democrats, in some cases, need to see more of it if they want to hold on to the Senate, like in Montana. This Wisconsin race, I think, could actually be tighter than we think. I think it's actually tightening up. It's interesting, a little bit of trivia. This Senate seat is the longest held particular seat by the Democrats of any Senate seat in the U.S. Senate since 1952, since Joe McCarthy left the Senate. So I think this will be tight. I think Wisconsin's going to be tight on election night in the presidential. I think this is going to be tighter than some of the Democratic strategists originally thought.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Bob. Thank you very much, Karina. And thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage. And click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.